Before railways covered continents and before oil became the great liquid fortune, an empire learned to print money from a cargo it could barely admit it was selling. In the dark ports between India and China, wooden chests of opium became more than contraband. They became the financial engine behind one of the most ruthless trade systems the modern world had ever seen. I am Walt, and this is not a story about a single merchant taking a risk on a distant sea. This is the story of a machine built from ships, auctions, silver, soldiers, private traders, and carefully arranged denial. At its center was a brutal question. How do you make a nation buy from you when that nation does not want what you are selling? In the late 18th and early 19th century, Britain wanted Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain with a hunger that seemed almost bottomless. Drawing rooms in London depended on tea. Fashionable tables wanted porcelain, merchants wanted profit. But there was a problem. China did not need British goods in the same way. The Qing Empire had little interest in filling its markets with British manufactures. So the balance of trade moved painfully in one direction. Silver flowed out of Britain and into China. For an empire that measured strength in bullion, shipping, and credit, that imbalance was more than inconvenient. It was a weakness. The old Canton system restricted foreign merchants to a narrow commercial world on the Chinese coast, where permission, intermediaries, and rules shaped every transaction. Britain wanted wider access, but access without leverage is just a request. So Britain searched for something China would take. Not officially, not honorably, but reliably. The answer was grown under strict control in India. In Bengal and Bihar, the East India Company tightened its grip over opium production. Farmers were drawn into a system that pushed them toward poppy cultivation. The product was processed, packed into chests, and sold through auctions, often in Calcutta. The company did not always sail into China openly, carrying the drug itself. That was the elegance of the machine. It sold the opium to private merchants, who then moved it through the coastal networks and smuggling channels that fed the Chinese market. The company could claim distance. The empire could claim principle. The silver still came back. That is where the story becomes colder. The monopoly was not just in the fields, it was in the chain. The company controlled a territory in India. It shaped production. It organized supply. It profited from auctions. Private merchants handled the dirty edge of distribution. Chinese demand pulled silver back across the sea. Then that silver helped pay for the tea Britain wanted in the first place. A circle had been built. Opium out, silver in, tea home. On paper, it looked like commerce. In practice, it was financial engineering with human consequences buried inside the ledger. By the early 19th century, the trade had grown too large to remain a shadow. Chinese officials saw the damage. Addiction, corruption, and silver outflow were becoming matters of state. The Qing government tried to restrict the trade, then suppress it. But suppression is difficult when the market has been built across ports, merchants, smugglers, and imperial interests. Every chest represented more than a product. It represented tax revenue, commercial credit, shipping profit, and political pressure. Then came Lin Zexu. In 1839, the imperial commissioner arrived in Canton with a mandate to stop the trade. He moved with seriousness, not theater. He demanded that foreign merchants surrender their opium stocks. Large quantities were seized and destroyed at Human. For the Qing court, it was an act of sovereignty. For British merchants, it was the destruction of property. For the British state, it became the spark that turned a trade dispute into war. The First Opium War was not simply a moral argument with cannons attached. It was the moment when distribution, finance, and military power revealed themselves as parts of the same machine. Britain had naval superiority, industrial weapons, and a commercial class that understood exactly what access to China was worth. The war ended with the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, opening treaty ports, ceding Hong Kong, and forcing a new structure of trade. The opium question did not vanish. It expanded into a wider system of pressure, concessions, and unequal terms. The monopoly logic had broken through diplomacy and become imperial architecture. And here is the part that still matters in any serious reading of business history. The East India Company and the networks around it did not merely find a product with demand. They solved a balance of payments problem with a controlled commodity. They used India as a production base, China as the demand center, private traders as the distribution layer, and the British state as the ultimate backstop when the market was threatened. That is not a normal business model. That is a trade machine with force behind it. The financial mechanics were chillingly efficient. A controlled supply in India created pricing power. Auction systems turned the product into predictable revenue. Private merchants transformed official distance into practical distribution. Silver from China repaired Britain's trade imbalance. Naval force protected the terms of access when local authority resisted. Each part made the next part stronger. If one link came under pressure, another could absorb the shock. If moral criticism appeared, the language of property and trade could be used. If Chinese law interfered, British power could escalate. If the company needed plausible deniability, private merchants filled the gap. The system had layers, and every layer protected the profit. This is why the story cannot be understood as smuggling alone. Smuggling is too small a word. This was monopoly as infrastructure. It connected land control, agricultural discipline, maritime logistics, finance, diplomacy, and war. The cargo was illegal in the place where demand was strongest, but the system around it was organized with the sophistication of a state-backed corporation. Modern markets still know this pattern, though they dress it differently. The most powerful businesses rarely depend on one product alone. They control the rails beneath the product, supply, distribution, financing, regulation, access. Enforcement. The visible item may be a chest, a barrel, a screen, a contract, or a shipment. The real business is the corridor it travels through. The opium monopoly was especially dark because the corridor passed through suffering. There is no clean way to polish that. Fortunes were made from dependency. Balance sheets improved while households and officials in China confronted the damage. Indian farmers were tied into production systems they did not design. Merchants grew rich by standing between legality and appetite. The empire could speak of trade while its profits moved through coercion. That is the unease at the center of the whole story. The machine worked. That does not make it admirable. It makes it more frightening. In business history, successful systems are often studied for their efficiency, scale, and strategic genius. But sometimes the most efficient system is also the most revealing. It shows what happens when profit is allowed to recruit law, geography, military power, and moral distance. A single commodity becomes a lever. A port becomes a choke point. A shipping route becomes a bloodstream. And an empire begins to depend on the very trade it publicly struggles to defend. The opium monopoly funded more than commerce. It funded confidence. It helped Britain keep buying what it wanted from China without accepting the old imbalance. It allowed a European power to turn colonial land in India into a financial answer to Chinese economic resistance. It made private traders rich, strengthened imperial reach, and changed the map of Asian trade. But the deeper post-mortem is colder than the numbers. When distribution, force, and finance merge, monopoly stops behaving like a business advantage and starts behaving like a weapon. It does not simply compete, it compels. It does not merely serve demand, it manufactures dependence, protects access, and punishes resistance. That is why this story still casts such a long shadow. It reminds us that the darkest empires are not always built by men who shout. Sometimes they are built by accountants, shipping agents, governors, bankers, and captains who each touch only one part of the chain, while the whole machine moves quietly across the sea. Thank you for watching. If this story gave you a sharper view of money, power, and the machinery behind empire, like the video and subscribe to InkedGold for more high-stakes business and financial documentaries. I appreciate you being here, and I will see you in the next video. Before you go, which is more dangerous in business history, the product itself or the system that makes the product impossible to escape?